So thank you for joining us this afternoon for Living History, the past, present, and future of historic Black towns and communities. Oh, settlements, I apologize, which is part of our 2024 webinar series, Preserve the Past, Build for the Future. We are recording this session and it will be made available to you on our YouTube channel. If you wish to utilize the closed captioning, please click on the caption button below. My name is Susan Glimsher, and I'm the Director of the Office of Communications, Education, and Outreach for the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. Up to 1,200 Black towns and settlements were established between the 19th and 20th centuries. About 30 of these communities still exist today. During this webinar, we'll hear from the experts who are working to preserve these communities and towns and their histories to ensure that their legacies are documented for future generations. Before we get started, a quick word about the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. The ACHP is an independent federal agency that promotes the economic, educational, environmental, and cultural values of historic preservation and advises the President and Congress on national historic preservation policy. The ACHP is comprised of 24 statutory members, and we are the only federal agency whose sole mission is historic preservation. A large part of the ACHP's work is overseeing Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, which requires federal agencies and all those receiving federal funding or licensure to consider the effects of any undertaking to historic properties. This webinar series fulfills several aspects of our mission: to educate the public about the benefits of historic preservation, to bring the next generation of preservationists into the field, and to build a more inclusive preservation program. We have a great lineup this year for the series. All webinars start at 2 p.m. Eastern Time and last for 1 hour. Coming up on March 26th is History in Danger, community-led responses to preserving Asian American Pacific Islander heritage sites. On April 24th, join us for Traditional Trades Careers in Historic Preservation. And our final webinar in the series will be May 21st, Disappearing Indigenous Heritage, Climate Change, and Community Displacement. You can register for all of these on our webinar page. We will be putting the link in the chat now, and we'll also add it again after the speakers are finished. You can also find the recordings of our past year's webinars at that same link. We are really excited about today's guests. They are Joe Banner and Dr. Joy Banner, co-founders of the Descendants project. N.Y. Nathiri, the executive director for the Association to Preserve Eatonville Community in Florida. And Andrea Roberts, associate professor at the University of Virginia and the founder and director of the Texas Freedom Colonies Project. Welcome to all of you. Before we begin, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat box or in the Q&A box. Once the speakers have given their presentations, my colleague Lynn Richmond will pose your questions to the speakers. Now let's begin with Joe and Joy. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Oh, hi, I'm sorry, I'm not able to start my video.
Hold on one second. Lynn, did you by any chance turn Joy's video off?
Try again now.
Okay, here we go.
There.
Well, hello, everybody. Well, it's not that it really mattered that you couldn't see me, because me and Joe are identical twins, so we would have been fine. So yeah, we are really. My name is Dr. Joy Banner, and I'm here with my twin sister Joe. We are based in a small town called Wallace, Louisiana, in St. John the Baptist Parish. And we are the co-founders and the co-directors of the Descendants Project. And we, again, are really happy to be having this discussion today because we are in a process in our efforts to protect our community from a huge industrial project, which for us is a grain terminal, smack dab in the middle of our little community. We are finding out so much rich history about our community. And one of the aspects that we have found is our rich history as a free town. And before I hand it off to Joe, I just want to say that we are located in between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, which historically had hundreds of plantations on both sides of the Mississippi River, the East Bank and the West Bank. And so now we have, in contemporary times, we have about a couple of dozen of those plantations, many of them that exist as museums. There's only one plantation museum that is dedicated to slavery, which is Whitney Plantation. Joe and I are descendants of people that were enslaved at Whitney. I was also their director of communications, and we live only about a mile away from Whitney site. But anyway, our identity as a community really was in terms of these plantations that were around us. We have a pretty intense plantation tourism industry. New Orleans is only about 45 minutes away from us. And so the plantation tours are heavily marketed. And so we have a lot of history about the plantations. We have our family history in our neighborhood, but this other history that we're finding out is rather unique and special. And with that, I will turn it over to Joe.
Yes, hi, everybody. Again, I'm Joe. And just as Joy was saying, we have so much in our history. We define ourselves as descendants, and we speak that we're descendants of the enslaved. However, we are descendants of everyone who settled along the Mississippi River in our area. We're 10th generation Louisianians. I think it's so important to have descendants, particularly those of the enslaved or Black descendants, and part of the conversation, because we see so many different angles of the story and of the history. We're able to see spots and consider different elements that normally go overlooked. So it's really crucial that descendants are able to take part in these conversations and are able to participate in our history, are collaborating with tourism offices, the state level, local level, federal level, to make sure that all of the history is being considered. Although it's not easy being in a fight to save our community, as Joy mentioned, we are a free town. The free town was established by the Union soldiers. This was a self-sustaining community. They had businesses, there was churches. Essentially, they had their own insurance companies and banks with the benevolent societies that were present in these communities. And there were just many of them. Every street, almost every other street had its own benevolent society. That's how prolific these communities were. However, with the encroachment of heavy industry, this type of lifestyle was destroyed, and little remains of those communities. So those that are still here, like Wallace in Louisiana, is even more important than ever to really keep these communities together and understand that we did not need intervention from like heavy industry. It was put upon us, or placed upon us, and then we were told that we needed to have these industries in our community. So part of our mission has really been able to claim our own independence and our own space to say that we don't need anyone to solve the problems. These communities really have they were taking care of themselves. They were self-sustaining, as I mentioned before. So we are just in our fight, we are elevating the voices that have not been heard before. Many of these Black community members members of our community whose stories have gone untold. Just recently, we had a story published or produced by a news station in Baton Rouge, WBRZ Channel 2, produced a story about Henry DeMar, who is one of the founders of Southern University, an HBCU that we have here. Union soldier, escaped the plantation, learned to read and write on the plantation, and after that became a politician. For 20 plus years, was a representative and senator, and then started Southern University, and is right here in our community. That story is rarely told. So it's these type of stories that can really help with the preservation of Black communities. And Joy, I'll hand it back to you.
No, well, and I think we pretty much covered a lot of the main points, but I just want to say that the going through this process with the Corps of Engineers and that permitting process right now, we're in the section 106 again, and that is the review of the necessary review of cultural and historic resources when there's believed to be historic and cultural assets. Whenever there's a project that needs federal permitting, that receives federal funding, or there's some type of federal assistance. And we asked to be part of that consulting process for the Corps of Engineers as they determine whether or not that development will receive the permitting. And it's through that work that the Advisory Council for Historic Preservation has been to the majority of our, I think all of our meetings, and then are formally part of that process with us. And so I just want to commend the work that has been contributed, and the ACHP acknowledging that our community, the history, is not just about the structures and the sites, but it's most important, how do the living descendant communities, how do people live with it? What are those components as part of our everyday lives and experience? And if we are to be displaced from our community, then that's not historic preservation. And so I think that was revolutionary, pioneering opinion from ACHP. And I hope everyone learns more about it so that they can use it to protect their own communities. And I think that is about it for us.
Thank you, ladies. You're doing such excellent work. Now I would like to invite N. Wine Theory, the Executive Director for the Association to Preserve Eatonville Community in Florida, to tell us a little bit about her work.
Good afternoon to everyone. Greetings from the historic town of Eatonville, Florida. We are located about 10 miles northeast of downtown Orlando, in Orange County, Florida, a county that is known around the world as a destination, most because of the attractions. We were established in 1987. The Association to Preserve the Eatonville Community is a 501c3 historic preservation, cultural arts, and community revitalization organization. Our mission is to promote Eatonville, Florida's considerable heritage, historical, and cultural resources as a means for the community's revitalization and economic development. And via programming which promotes pride of heritage, educational excellence, and the cultural arts, will preserve and protect the community for posterity. I am so pleased to be able to join you. And as it happens, last night at the Eatonville Town Council meeting, the 5-member council voted to accept a pro bono master planning proposal with the understanding by the council that the National Trust for Historic Preservation would be a partner in helping to actually go through the process of community master planning. Perhaps some of you are aware of the controversy that surrounds the historic Robert Hungerford High School campus property, an approximate 100-acre plot of land that has a direct connection to Booker T. Washington and the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. The Orange County Public School Board had received the ownership of that land in 1954 as a part of a settlement to provide education to African American children in Eatonville. Previously, this land was dedicated completely to education for Black children in Eatonville, in Orange County, in the state of Florida, and in fact, people came from outside of the state. It was a private boarding school founded on the tenets of the Tuskegee model. That meant that it was a self-sustaining school. The teachers and students, many of them lived on the campus. And in the morning, they did their subjects. And in the afternoon, there was the farm to be tended, the chickens and the hogs and the vegetables and the lumber mill. In fact, if you visit www.preserveeatonville.org, you'll see a timeline and you'll see really a great deal of information about the Hungerford School. In fact, in the early 1900s, Eatonville was touted by Booker T. Washington as one of the models for quote unquote Negro success when people of African ancestry were given the opportunity. And so what we are looking to do today in historic Eatonville is to meet the marketplace in cultural heritage tourism. As I say, we are located in Orange County. We have been working at this niche marketing this niche market since the early 1990s. In fact, we were working in this area before cultural heritage tourism actually entered into the jargon of the hospitality industry. Perhaps some of you have heard of the annual Zora Neale Hurston Festival of the Arts and Humanities. I would invite you to visit zorafestival.org. We are now in our 35th season, and we have the distinction of being America's longest running festival, arts and humanities festival, celebrating the cultural contributions of people of African ancestry throughout the diaspora. So for us in Eatonville, we see the process of not just surviving, but thriving because of our considerable cultural heritage and historical resources. Our job, our challenge, frankly, is to ensure that all of the foundational documents, the comprehensive plan, the zoning, the kinds of things that protect a community, that they are in place. And I'm pleased to say that the National Trust for Historic Preservation is going to be a partner with the town of Eatonville and with Preserve Eatonville community. It's very exciting to us to hear the stories of others. We are part of, for example, a multi-state alliance called the Historic Black Towns and Settlements Alliance with persons living in Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, Louisiana, Florida, and Georgia. And I think that it's very important for this network to exist and networks like this so that we can affirm for each other the fact that who we are and what we represent is an important part of the American story. Part of what we do on a day-to-day basis is to operate the Zora Neale Hurston National Museum of Fine Arts. We call it the Hurston for short. It has been in existence since July of 1990. And on a daily basis, it is the affirmation of the fact that the public is interested in who we are and what we are doing. And that public is interested representing people from around the United States as well as from outside of the United States, because Eatonville is the hometown of Zora Neale Hurston, the writer, the folklorist, and the anthropologist. And because she has made Eatonville a literary destination, and because of the magnitude of her and the beauty of her storytelling, our visitors come from every walk of life and from every ethnic background, such that on an annual basis, basically 50% of our visitorship are people who are of African ancestry, and 50% are not. Eatonville is a small community, about 3,000 on a good day, and it remains and retains all of the security that a small community represents, at the same time literally being a living museum of life that is not rural and not suburban and not urban, but that really is a kind of intersection of those three demographics. I would say to you that what we see in Eatonville is a promise of what can happen in terms of economic prosperity when you know your story and when you are prepared to meet the public and to share with them your story. We also think that we are a very fine example of the power of collaboration. In other words, we work intentionally and intensively with a broad range of other institutions, whether they are post-secondary like the University of Central Florida, or most recently, Dr. Andre Roberts presented at our conference being sponsored by the Department of Modern Languages and History at Seminole State College of Florida. We also work very closely across the spectrum with arts and historical and humanities organizations. And we work globally with institutions in Africa. We have an initiative called the Africa America Women's Economic Forum. So for us, community allows for a broad range of possibilities. And as I say, it really allows us to see what can happen with cultural heritage tourism as a year-round enterprise, because cultural heritage tourism is a multi-billion with a B industry internationally, and in the United States, that niche market also is a growing market representing billions of dollars. Pre-COVID, for example, the data on the African-American visitorship of this niche market was $104 billion spent just internally, just within the borders of the United States of America. So though there are challenges, there is no doubt that there are challenges. Right now, we are in court against Orange County Public School Board, and thanks to the support of the Southern Poverty Law Center, we have been able to let the nation know about the kind of economic injustice that the school board of Orange County has tried to perpetrate. All of that having been said, we're looking at a glass that's half full, and very excited to be able to share our story with you during this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to hear about all of these grassroots efforts that are going on that we might not hear about otherwise. So thank you, NY. Next up is Dr. Andrea Roberts, who is with us today and who I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but is also a member of the ACHP's Experts Advisory Committee. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm quite honored to be on with these illustrious guests who are doing such impressive work in their respective communities as well as in the world. My presentation today is called Outsider Preservation, Descendant-Centered Education and Practice. And just to share a little bit about the nature of the work I do and the context in which I've been doing this work, it has been in landscapes known as freedom colonies. We've used a number of different terminologies to talk about intentional Black communities today. And while all of those are important, what is most important is to understand the nature of historic Black placemaking in the United States historically. And Texas freedom colonies are but one example of that. So these particular communities were founded 1865 to 1930. They began as rural clusters of land and business owners. And Sidney and Conrad, who wrote a book about freedom colonies, had this to say about the communities, and this has really driven a lot of my approach to the work of identifying and elevating the story of these places. They are places unplatted and unincorporated, individually unified only by church and school and residents' collective belief that a community existed. That collective belief, which is one of the most intangible elements of heritage conservation, is essential to being able to substantiate the existence of these communities. Churches, schools, homesteads, cemeteries, general stores, those are the last evidence of freedom colonies. And often freedom colonies were a constellation of all of those type of landscape features: churches, schools, homesteads, cemeteries, general stores. Of the 557 names of places that my research team and I have been able to put together over the years, we've been able to identify names, locations in association with the African-American placemaking of 526 of those. Mind you, I'm speaking about Texas alone. So keep that number in mind as we talk about where and how many of these places exist and what it means for a place to exist. However, you might be asking, how is it that there could have been this many places, but we don't see them identified as such on our maps? Well, for one, several of these places were never incorporated. That means they were never incorporated towns, like Eatonville, for example. Several of these settlements were the victims of racial violence, infrastructure that bifurcated the community, literally and figuratively, population loss, displacement, the Great Migration, land dispossession, and the challenges in the present for those descendants who are trying to maintain their attachments, land ownership, and protect from environmental racism is the access to resources, the capacity, as in being able to mobilize their descendant community to work on these issues, the agency to work on these issues, actually knowing at which points in a respective process they can interject themselves and make a difference, and vulnerability. Vulnerability in the sense of the vulnerability of the history and what substantiates the existence of the place physically, as well as the threats to those places from the outside. And the scope of the geography is very large. It's very large. And I do want to just share this picture is significant to me. This is in the Freedom Colony known as Riceville in Southwest Houston. This is where my parents were married. This is where my late grandmother is sitting in the front in the gray suit, who just passed in May. And the woman to her left and the man to her right have also passed away since this picture has been taken. So in terms of the fragility and the vulnerability, that to me is one of the most tangible ways to understand the nature of the vulnerability of these places, is that our walking archives, our body archives, are leaving us every day. So when I came upon Shankleville in 2014 and attended some of their annual celebrations, including a new celebration called the Purple Hull Pea Festival, as well as their annual homecoming celebration, I was heartened to find an asset-based approach to facilitating the return and mobilizing their descendant community to address their preservation concerns. So what that looked like was sharing their foundational story, that is their creation stories of two enslaved people who reunited at the point of where Shankleville has been was founded. And in reuniting, while still enslaved, created a space of freedom where they begin to germinate the idea of freedom, so that post-emancipation, they then created community in this place. A very significant story in Deep East Texas. Shankleville is in Newton County. And if you are to read the history of this region of Newton County in Louisiana, the former home of the Neutral Strip, this was also known as no man's land. This was a place in which the story of slaves, that is marinage or maroons, actually hiding out in this area, is a frequently repeated story, because this is the nature of this particular area of Texas in the United States at this time. But you'll also see here a number of people standing together at a table, and those are representatives from other freedom colonies throughout that region, that is Newton and Jasper counties, an area we don't often associate with Black empowerment, right? But what I found were these representatives were called homecoming presidents, and they were also people who were stewards of the finances, not only for this celebration, but for cemeteries and cemetery preservation. I also found this to be a time where they didn't just share stories, but they also encouraged people to get involved in a number of different preservation practices that had to do with bringing youth back. They had a scholarship competition. They had a homestead that is now in the National Register of Historic Places. So I thought to myself, after meeting those individuals in Shankleville and the rest that were standing at the table, how many of these folks, or how many other places, have similar stories? Maybe not the exact story, but how were these communities using their creation stories of their founding church, their founding individuals, their founding institutions, and founding moments? How were they using those to get people to return and remain involved and to advocate? And so I employed a number of research methods, and this was all during, my initial research period as a doctoral student at the University of Texas at Austin. And later, I began to move around these communities and learn more and reach out and meet people like Fred McCrae and his family, who were doing things like descendant youth education in Dixie community. Apologies to the vegetarians in the audience, but they teach young people some of the life ways, including the food ways of the formerly enslaved people like Billy McCrae. There is a slave narrative of the story of Billy McCrae, and his ancestor is teaching some of the same food ways of the people there to the youth in the area. And then there's people like Gwendolyn Bryant Carter, also from Jasper County, with some roots in Rock Hill community, who has been collecting and organizing information about homecomings and homecoming calendars. And the collection of that data and the demographic, or rather the ethnographic work that I did, enabled me to take some of the material from the book Freedom Colonies that said there were only 14 settlements in these two counties. But after making geotags, or taking the geotags associated with the tours and the materials that I was able to collect, I was able to map more than 34 places. So one map tells you the reality is that there are 14 communities, and another map is telling you that there are 34 communities. And that got me to thinking about the other challenges I found around these communities and preservation, were the authorized heritage perspective, which is a terminology from Laura Jane Smith, which is that of formal planning and preservation. which has a certain sort of standards. And then Descendants, Heritage and Perspective and Planning, which has to do a lot more with storytelling and does sustain churches and cares about structures, but also has a lot of embodied traditions and cultural preservation practices that don't often, are not often accessed to substantiate the existence of a descended community still invested in a place. And so my experiences working with descended communities, co-planning with them while doing this work, led to my creating, in 2014 while still a student, the Texas Freedom Colonies Project, whose mission is to be an educational social justice initiative dedicated to preserving Black settlement landscapes and heritage and supporting grassroots practitioners through participatory research. As mentioned before, I am a professor, a full-time professor in urban environmental planning and director of the Center for Cultural Landscapes. So my work is very much a research perspective that attempts to bridge the world of the university to the world of the communities. So our work is based or rooted in a place preservation model, which simply means we connect and collect and countermap and co-create. More specifically, what this looks like, our place preservation model is about connecting in face-to-face during workshops and online during workshops and our YouTube channel. It means collecting and curating evidence of place, which is often in oral histories and stories and pictures and images and maps. And we co-create, that is, we work with communities to co-create solutions, curation solutions, advocacy solutions that support their own community-based efforts. And what you see here are students I've worked with, one of our workshops, advertisements of our YouTube channel, and the kind of collateral and educational material that we distribute. And this is just showing sort of the detailed process of the public information. We go to all the public resources first. So people say, well, have you looked here? We did that first. And then we use the atlas, the online atlas, to aggregate information from the public. And this is a preventive mapping activity. That is, I created this, one, because Descendants asked for a place to aggregate all of their information about freedom colonies, and two, because we wanted a preventative approach rather than a reactive approach to making our places visible and to make them accessible to surveyors and people involved in Section 106 processes. And this is but one example of the hundreds of images and stories. This is a community called Acres of Diamonds. Drayon Jones is the individual who shared the story of the place, the origination of their church, as well as shared several images. And so if you go to the atlas and you look up Acres of Diamonds, you will find this story and several more images of his current connection to this place. This is showing you our current status. It's showing, if you go to the atlas, you'll be able to search, and you can also go to the dashboard and see our status and search by county and search by individual freedom colony. These are images associated with our 2022 class, More Than Monuments, Preservation of Social Justice. So we do project-based learning and collaboration with descendants like Miss Gloria Smith from Burleson County's Dabney Hill. The students were involved in oral history curation, cemetery mapping, and developing a website that was a reservoir for information that Gloria Smith used to help advocate for historical markers. This is an example of a workshop in which we did drawing exercises with County Historical Commission's members who shared their stories with African-American members of Gonzales County community to talk about the difference in ideas about moments of significance and places of significance. And these are just some of the ways that we leverage technology to aggregate interest and connect descendants to one another. And all of that work is now culminating in what's called the Outsider Preservation Initiative. I'm proud to announce that the University of Virginia Center for Cultural Landscapes, of which I'm the faculty director, will be leading a 3-year Mellon Monuments project called the Outsider Preservation Initiative, which asks the same question that I've been asking for years, but attempts to answer it over a larger geography. how do commemoration and oral tradition activate the larger diaspora of Freedom Colony, that's historic Black settlement descendants, to document, protect, and regenerate or reactivate endangered Freedom Colonies? So the Freedom Colony Atlas will become a larger portal for interaction. We will also cultivate communities of practice and workshops and symposia, a new preservation pedagogy to change the way we approach teaching our professionals to engage with these communities, and making grants available to outsider preservationists and artists, those outside professional preservation. So finally, these are just images of the initial work that we've been doing to unite communities across vast geographies, whether they be from Virginia or they be from New Mexico or Kansas or California. And these are just some of the events that we had in September. And then as recently as yesterday and the day before, we've been having our inaugural events around bringing the insight in arts-based engagement with place, which was a kickoff in which we had our freedom visionaries and intellectuals and descendants come together in a retreat and a panel to talk about how we will leverage the arts and these outsider expressions and approaches to preservation to record and protect places across various geographies. Thank you.
Andrea, do you ever sleep? I am so impressed by the work everyone is doing. And also, seriously, do you sleep? That is a lot to be doing. So I would love to invite all of our speakers today to join us on the screen. And I think we have one or two questions in the Q&A, but if you would like to put a comment or a question into the Q&A or the chat, please do so. We have a few more minutes. And I have to say, these are pretty impressive people, so you may want to speak to them.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lynn.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lynn Richmond. I'm the Communications and Public Affairs Specialist at the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. I'm so glad to join you, and thank you to all the panelists, and thank you to Susan for doing such a great job as the moderator. Our first question is from Fatim. Do any of you or your organizations help communities of Black landowners looking to preserve and keep ownership of historically Black towns and land? There's been a lot of talk of corporations claiming land owned by African Americans as public domain and seizing it. Anyone want to address that? Dr. Roberts?
Yes, so I would say two things. It's important to identify organizations such as those that have air property in their names. There are nonprofits in Georgia and South Carolina that work with issues around property ownership and clear title. So I would say that. Number two, your nearest law school is the first place to go, and go to their clinic, and you often have to get on a long list to try to get support. That is, they can sometimes make your particular challenge a project for their law students. This is not nearly enough. This is a vast, huge problem. If I look in my mailbox right now, my email box for Freedom College Project, it's going to be full of questions around help me with land loss or encroachment or takings. And this is a serious problem, and it requires serious federal investment and intervention. So I would say to you to use those resources and also make it clear that this is an area needing more money, more time, and more investment.
And I just add that one of so yes to everything Dr. Roberts said, the heirs property can be a bit tricky in Louisiana as well as in other places. And so we're trying to find support. We're not trying to find, but we have a plan in place to provide legal support for people that have their land that's in a quagmire. One of the other things that Joe and I have been doing as well is we've been circling back with our funders, and we've been acquiring the land ourselves. We were able to purchase and we purchased land from my great grandfather, great grandmother, his original footprint of our neighborhood, which they founded. It's over 100+ years old, and it is immediately on this site of the grain terminal project that we are fighting against. And so there is an advantage of having land that's abutting an industrial site, because when things happen with zoning, there's certain legal requirements that have to be provided to landowners. We also just acquired the Woodland Plantation, the home of the largest slave rebellion in, we believe, in the United States. And so I think of just in terms of not only helping people get their land, but also looking at real estate as a way of, our stewardship of, and I don't call it owning the land, I call it we're stewarding the land for the community, for community uses, right? And so I think it's okay, we need to start looking at how to be strategic in real estate, because that's what happens when our communities are encroached upon and targeted. They're using real estate strategies to sometimes trap us in. And so we have to think about like what pieces of land, what parcels are available, and what strategically makes sense from a preservation standpoint.
Any other comments? If not, we'll move on to, we have quite a few questions. I want to try to get as many in as possible.
Lynn, excuse me 1 second. NY is not able to make her video work.
Oh,
Would
okay.
you might be able to fix that.
I'll take care of that in just a second. There's a question from Samuel to Joe and Joy. Was the family home in which Henry DeMoss died located at 1712 Canal Street in New Orleans? He'd like to include his passing in the record by associating it with a previously recorded archaeological site.
We know that he died in New Orleans. I can check with our historian who's doing more research just to verify it's the truth of that. But yes, we know he died in New Orleans, just not exactly sure. I can say exactly sure if that was the address that you mentioned, but we will definitely get back with you on that. And thank you for asking that.
Okay. M asks, I would love more information about bringing the outside in the arts from Andrea. Do you have a webpage I could visit? Any more information that you can share?
Yes, I do. I'm actually going to place in the chat a link to an inquiry page. We've only just started the initiative, and so we are building our capacity to serve and to invite people into the process. And what we have available right now is a page that asks you to share a little about yourself and your interest in the project. So I'll make that available in the chat, as well as a link to a description of the project as well.
Thank you. In fact, everyone, I believe your websites were put in earlier in the chat, but I would suggest you put them right back in there right now, because we're having a lot of interest in your work.
Well, and
So-
can I just say, I just love how having these conversations and how much of the work, like we're in the same spaces. And so with Dr. Roberts and you bringing the outside in that project, we received the the Monument grant, we're 2024 Monument Lab grant for our Liberation Labyrinth, which is dedicated to an outside space, meditation, restorative, all dedicated to freedom seeking in the landscapes of liberation that the Maroon communities use as part of their liberation. And so just seeking to reclaim that relationship between us and Black communities in the natural world especially. So I'm just loving hearing the conversation and how much of it is intersecting.
Yeah, that is amazing. I'm so glad that we were able to bring all of you together, and number one, to have you meet and to possibly collaborate. There's a really wonderful question from Dana Richards. Can the panelists speak more about the importance of including descendants in historic preservation and planning, and how it can impact people's day-to-day existence?
That's a good one.
I would say that it's critical in terms of the ultimate success of the efforts. for us in a small community like Eatonville, where there's so much connectivity, but in terms of blood relations and extended family, the real power of the historic preservation efforts resides in the people. And when you are fighting a major institution, there's no way to really succeed if you don't have that fundamental buy-in, because it has to be authentic. And over time, all of these efforts require, in terms of sustainability, you have to have the buy-in and the support of the people who constitute the community. And so I would say that it's like if you don't have those grassroots, if you don't have those strong grassroots, you can't expect to sustain the work.
If I could respond to that too, I think the Descendants are the first line of defense when it comes to protecting communities. And I think it's intentional many times that Black descendants and Black communities are told that the communities have nothing. It's done purposefully so that we don't stand up and that we don't protect, and we believe that it's nothing, or that our land only means something, like for example, for us, if it's connected to a built environment or a plantation home. We really did not hear much about our community being a free town or being the home of the Union soldiers. That was something that we're getting closer. We're knowing more about that identity, and it just gives us more. It just gives us more texture to the community and more to protect. So Descendants, by having them educated, by having them really involved in this process, that is crucial to the protection of not just the Black communities, but even other communities around us. So I think it's just really important that Descendants are involved in every way that these communities are being represented. Thank you.
Okay, we just have like 4 questions that in different ways ask how the participants might be able to interact with you. If you speakers would be comfortable, would you kindly put your emails in the chat so that I can cross 4 questions off my list and these participants will be able to reach out to you. Thank you. Sorry, Lynn, go ahead.
Is there this is from Latoya. Is there a map report that currently documents the initial number of 1,200 Black towns and settlements in the U.S.? I know that this is work in progress, but it would be nice to have a baseline if that's available. Is that something that is out there?
I know that Everett Fly out of San Antonio, Texas, is probably one of the preeminent researchers in historic Black towns and settlements. His body of work really constitutes about 40 years. I'll give that everettfly@gmail.com, but he has done a considerable amount of work on that number. And so that really is that 1,100, 1,200 number is a source that you can find documented.
I'll add that there's a working group based at UNC, but it is a group of a number of us that are working on this effort of mapping Black towns. And Danielle Purifoy has been one of the major leaders of that effort. And she's based at UNC Chapel Hill. So she would be a good person for you to contact. I'll put her name in the chat, but she's an important leader in trying to aggregate all of our mapping efforts.
Susan, we have a couple minutes more, maybe one more question.
Well, I think this is a great one. May I butt in and ask it?
Absolutely.
Okay. What to the speakers, what are the immediate existential threats to current descendant-led efforts to preserve and tell their history, with the current attacks against the teaching of Black history and further cementing its erasure? It's being erased. So that, I think, is such an incredibly timely question and so important. Would love to hear from all of you about that.
I'm going to refer people to the Southern Poverty Law Center website on this following of the story of the historic Robert Hungerford High School campus controversy, because it has, I think, a complete chronology along with articles and reference points. Southern Poverty Law Center website will talk with you about the existential threat that the town of Eatonville is currently facing, and which the Association to Preserve the Eatonville Community is, and B. Hatler, a descendant of the Hungerford family, is currently in district court with Orange County Public School Board.
Thank you. Joy, Joe, Andrea?
I would say look at an article in Texas Monthly, the November issue, which gives an extensive expose of the ways in which Black Americans are divested of their land, particularly in historic rural settlements. And this issue of land stewardship, ownership, and land ownership rights, I think are a major priority area. And that's one of the biggest barriers to being able to think of a future, let alone actually act on a future that has to do with land and settlement preservation.
I would say that what's the quote, never waste a good crisis. I think that I think it was Churchill that said it, but as there is an attack in the education system on its history, then parents are looking for other places to go to get the history and get the education, because they're not going to be able to get that in school. And so that's where these historic preservation sites, historic preservation, and the learning is going to be can come from us. So it is a travesty that education is being attacked. But I think looking at it from a heritage and tourism space, and even for opportunity for us for safe careers and information that centers and education that centers Black people and descendant communities, that's an opportunity there for you to create your own business, because it's going to that information is still going to be in demand.
Great, thank you. So as Lynn has stated, we will be happy to pose any of the unanswered questions to our speakers. Speakers, I was wondering if you could stay on after this is over for literally just one moment. To the folks that work with me, please copy everything in the chat for us so we'll be able to follow up on all of this, because it's really excellent material. So in closing, I just want to say thanks again. This was our most popular webinar so far in the series. Congratulations to all of you. We hope that you will join us for our future webinars. Again, I'm going to ask someone to put the webinar page link in the chat. And we really look forward to seeing you all again. And when you disconnect from this webinar, we would love it if you would fill out the survey that pops up. Just takes a couple seconds, and it really helps us to gather information about how to make these webinars even better. Thank you so much, everyone. We look forward to seeing you all again.